On a rainy Tuesday night in Manhattan, Ethan Cole carried his sleeping daughter through the lobby of Lancaster Group headquarters. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, her backpack bumping against his hip with every step. He was 35 years old, a senior financial analyst, and he had exactly 7 hours to complete a report that should have taken 3 days. The fluorescent lights above him flickered once as he stepped into the elevator, and Lily stirred against his shoulder, murmuring something about pancakes. Ethan pressed the button for the 42nd floor and closed his eyes just for a moment, feeling the weight of everything he was about to lose if he failed. The office was nearly empty when he arrived, just a few junior associates scattered across the open floor plan, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of their monitors. Ethan found a corner desk near the window and carefully lowered Lily into an ergonomic chair, tucking his jacket around her like a blanket. She was 6 years old with her mother's auburn hair and his own stubborn chin, and she had spent more nights in this building over the past month than any child ever should. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered that he would be right here, that everything would be fine, that she just needed to sleep a little longer. He had just opened his laptop when he heard the sharp click of heels against marble. Ava Lancaster stood at the end of the hallway, her silhouette framed by the city lights behind her. She was 31 years old, the youngest CEO in the company's history, and she had inherited the position after her father's sudden death 2 years ago. Everything about her suggested control, from the precise cut of her charcoal blazer to the way she held her tablet like a shield against the world. She walked toward Ethan without greeting him, her eyes scanning the spreadsheet on his screen. "The Meridian analysis," she said. "I need it on my desk by 6 tomorrow morning. Complete projections, risk assessment, and competitor benchmarks." Ethan glanced at the clock in the corner of his monitor. It was already 11. "Miss Lancaster, I've been here since 7 this morning. The data you're asking for requires access to files that aren't even. Then get access." Her voice carried no emotion, no acknowledgement that he was a human being rather than a machine designed to process her demands. "If you can't handle the pressure, Mr. Cole, perhaps you're not suited for Lancaster Group." She turned to leave, and her gaze passed briefly over Lily's sleeping form. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Ava's face, something that might have been recognition or confusion or even guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, and she continued walking without another word. Ethan watched her disappear around the corner, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly as he returned to his keyboard. He thought about his health insurance, about Lily's upcoming dental appointment, about the rent that was due in 9 days. He thought about the promises he had made to his daughter, and the ones he had made to himself back when he believed that working hard was enough to guarantee a decent life. He began typing, and he did not stop. The weeks that followed carved deep lines into Ethan's face and stripped away whatever reserves of energy he had left. Ava assigned him 2 additional projects before the Meridian analysis was even complete, explaining in her clipped, efficient way that she was testing his capacity for growth. She scheduled meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning and conference calls at 10 at night, always with the implicit understanding that attendance was not optional. Other employees whispered in the break room about Ethan's obvious exhaustion, about the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands, but no one said anything directly. They had seen what happened to people who pushed back against Ava Lancaster. At home, Ethan worked until the numbers blurred together on his screen. Lily sat beside him at the kitchen table, coloring in a book of dinosaurs, occasionally looking up to ask if he was almost done. He always told her yes, just a few more minutes, even when he knew it would be hours. One night, she asked if they could go to the park on Saturday, and he promised they would. And then Saturday came, and he spent the entire day on a video call with investors in Singapore while Lily watched cartoons alone in the living room. He discovered the errors by accident late on a Wednesday night when he was cross-referencing data for a quarterly report. 3 separate miscalculations in a document that bore Ava's signature, mistakes that had somehow survived multiple reviews and were now embedded in the company's official records. Anyone else might have ignored them, might have reasoned that correcting the CEO's work was a fast track to unemployment. But Ethan had been raised by a father who believed that integrity was the only thing a man truly owned. And so he fixed the numbers without telling anyone. He saved the corrected version and deleted any trace of the original, protecting the company from potential liability while asking for nothing in return. The early morning meeting was held in the glass-walled conference room on the 43rd floor, the one with the view of Central Park that Ava used to intimidate clients and employees alike. Ethan arrived at 5:50 with Lily still half asleep beside him, her small hand gripping his as they navigated the empty hallways. He found a chair in the corridor outside the conference room and helped her settle in, promising that he would be right on the other side of the glass, that she could wave to him if she needed anything. Inside, a dozen executives sat around the polished table, their expressions carefully neutral as they waited for the presentation to begin. The investors from Wellington Capital occupied the seats nearest the window, two men in nearly identical suits who spent more time examining their phones than looking at anyone in the room. Ava stood at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her voice measured as she walked through the quarterly projections. And then one of the investors interrupted her. "There's a discrepancy in Section 4, he said, scrolling through his tablet. "The risk calculations in this version don't match what we saw in the preliminary report." The room fell silent. Ava's face remained composed, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she tried to reconcile what she was hearing with what she believed to be true. "I made those corrections," Ethan said. Every head in the room turned toward him. He felt the weight of their attention like a physical force pressing against his chest, making it difficult to breathe. But he continued anyway. "The original calculations contained several errors that would have overstated our risk exposure by approximately 12%. I identified the issues during my review and updated the figures to reflect accurate projections." The investor from Wellington studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's exactly the kind of diligence we like to see. Miss Lancaster, you've got a sharp analyst on your team." Ava said nothing. She simply stared at Ethan with an expression he could not read, something between surprise and reassessment, as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. The meeting continued, but she never quite regained her equilibrium, and when it ended, she left the room without speaking to anyone. Ethan returned to the hallway to find Lily still sleeping in her chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. He lifted her gently and carried her toward the elevator, wondering if he had just made the worst mistake of his career. The exhaustion accumulated like sediment at the bottom of a river, layer upon layer of sleepless nights and missed meals and promises he could not keep. Ethan's hands began to tingle during meetings, a pins and needles sensation that started in his fingertips and spread upward to his wrists. He developed headaches that no amount of aspirin could touch, dull throbs behind his eyes that made it difficult to focus on the endless columns of numbers. He lost 8 pounds in 3 weeks without trying, his body consuming itself to fuel the machine that Ava Lancaster demanded he become. The autumn festival was supposed to be different. He had circled the date on the calendar months ago, back when his workload was still manageable and weekends still belonged to him. Lily had talked about it constantly, about the pumpkin painting and the hay rides and the caramel apples that her friend Sophie's mother had described in elaborate detail. She had picked out her costume, a purple witch's hat and a cape covered in silver stars, and she had practiced her trick-or-treating voice in the mirror every night before bed. But the night before the festival, Ava sent an email marked urgent, demanding a complete revision of the Thornton acquisition files. The work would take 12 hours at minimum and the deadline was Monday morning, and Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he could not do both. He tried to explain to Lily, kneeling beside her bed while she clutched her witch's hat and stared at him with eyes that were too old for her face. He told her that sometimes grown-ups had to make difficult choices, that he would make it up to her next year, that he was so sorry. She did not cry. She simply turned away from him and faced the wall, and he heard her whisper so quietly that he almost missed it. "You always say that, Daddy." He worked through the night while she slept, and he worked through the morning while she ate cereal alone in the kitchen. And by the time the festival was over, he had finished the revision and sent it to Ava with 3 hours to spare. But when he went to check on Lily, he found her sitting on her bed with her costume still folded neatly in her lap, her eyes red from crying, and he understood that some things could not be fixed with apologies or promises. On Friday afternoon, Ava called him into her office for a briefing on the Henderson merger. It was supposed to take 30 minutes. It took 4 hours. When she finally dismissed him, she mentioned almost casually that she needed additional documentation by Monday, that he should plan to work through the weekend, that the company's needs had to come before personal considerations. Ethan looked at her across the vast expanse of her mahogany desk, at the expensive art on her walls and the awards on her shelves and the absolute certainty in her eyes. And for the first time in his career at Lancaster Group, he said no. "I can't do it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that coiled in his stomach. "I have a daughter who needs me. I've already missed her festival, her parent-teacher conference, 3 bedtimes this week alone. I'm not missing anything else." Ava's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes, some recalibration of the assumptions she had made about who he was and what he would tolerate. She was not accustomed to hearing that word from anyone, least of all from an employee whose entire livelihood depended on her approval. "I see," she said finally. "We'll discuss this on Monday." She did not sound angry. She sounded curious. And somehow that was worse. The collapse happened on a Thursday in the elevator between the 42nd and 43rd floors. Ethan had just finished the final revision of the Henderson report, 73 pages of analysis that represented the culmination of 2 weeks of work with almost no sleep. He had sent it to Ava's inbox with a sense of hollow triumph, the kind of victory that felt more like surrender, and he had gathered his things to go home and finally rest. He made it 4 steps into the elevator before his vision blurred. The world tilted sideways and his legs buckled, and the last thing he heard before everything went dark was Lily screaming his name. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the cold marble floor of the lobby, surrounded by a circle of concerned faces. Someone had loosened his tie and propped his head on a folded jacket. Someone else was calling for an ambulance. And kneeling beside him, her designer suit forgotten, her careful composure finally cracked, was Ava Lancaster. "Don't try to move," she said, and her voice sounded strange, almost human. "Help is coming." Lily was crying somewhere nearby, great heaving sobs that cut through the ambient noise of the lobby like a knife. Ethan tried to turn toward her, tried to tell her that everything was fine, that Daddy was just tired, that there was nothing to worry about, but his body would not cooperate, and his vision kept sliding in and out of focus. And then Ava was doing something he never would have expected. She stood, walked over to Lily, and knelt down to meet her eyes. "Your father is going to be okay," Ava said quietly. "I promise. I'm going to make sure of it." She took Lily's hand and led her back to where Ethan lay, and she stayed there until the paramedics arrived, her fingers wrapped around the small hand of a child she had never spoken to before that moment. The knock came at exactly midnight. Ava Lancaster stood in his hallway wearing a gray wool coat that looked out of place in his building, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no trace of makeup on her face. She looked younger without the armor of her professional appearance, younger and more uncertain than he had ever seen her. "I know it's late," she said, "and I know I have no right to be here, but I couldn't wait until Monday. I need to apologize, and I needed to do it in person." In her hands, she carried a box wrapped in bright paper. "I saw your daughter looking at this in a store window about a month ago. I was passing by in my car, and I saw her standing there with her nose pressed against the glass. And I didn't stop. I should have stopped. I should have done a lot of things differently." The paper came off in excited strips, revealing a stuffed dragon with purple scales and iridescent wings. Lily's face lit up with pure joy. "It's the dragon, Daddy. It's the dragon." The next 2 hours were unlike anything Ethan could have imagined. He watched Ava Lancaster, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, sit on his daughter's twin bed and listen to detailed descriptions of every stuffed animal in the collection. He watched her examine crayon drawings with the same intensity she brought to quarterly reports. He watched her laugh at Lily's jokes, genuine laughter that transformed her face into something almost unrecognizable. "I've been thinking about something my father told me before he died," Ava said later. "He said that the hardest part of leadership wasn't making decisions. It was living with the consequences of those decisions, even when you couldn't see them." I made decisions about you, Ethan, about your time, your health, your relationship with your daughter. And I never once stopped to think about what those decisions were costing you. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Ava pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a proposal for a new position, a role that would give Ethan more autonomy, better hours, and a significant raise. There were provisions for child care assistance, flexible scheduling, and a guaranteed minimum number of vacation days. Why me? He asked. You have thousands of employees. Why focus all this energy on one analyst? Because you were the one who taught me that I was doing something wrong, she said. When you corrected those errors in my report, you could have used them against me. But you didn't. You fixed the problem and moved on because you care more about doing the right thing than about what you could gain from it. The weeks that followed were strange and uncertain. Ethan returned to work on a modified schedule, his hours reduced, his workload manageable, his weekends once again his own. He picked Lily up from school in the afternoons and took her to the park on Saturdays and tucked her into bed every night without the weight of unfinished reports pressing against his chest. And Ava changed too. She held fewer meetings, delegated more responsibilities, started leaving the office before sunset. She asked her employees about their families and remembered their answers. She apologized publicly for the culture of overwork she had created and announced new policies designed to protect her staff from the kind of burnout that had nearly killed Ethan. One afternoon, he confronted her about the rumors circulating through the office. People are talking about us, about what's really going on here. I know, she said. I've heard the rumors. What bothers me is that you might believe them, that you might think everything I've done was just manipulation or performance or some kind of elaborate game. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care what you think. I haven't, he said, surprised to realize it was true. I don't know why, but I haven't. The crisis came on a Friday afternoon. Lily was supposed to be at Margaret's house after school, but when Ethan called to check in, there was no answer. The school secretary told him in a voice tight with concern that Lily had been picked up by someone claiming to be her aunt. Ethan did not have a sister. Within an hour, Ava had mobilized the full resources of Lancaster Group in the search for Lily, security teams, private investigators, connections at the NYPD who owed her favors. She called in every chip she had, every relationship she had cultivated, every tool at her disposal, and she directed it all toward one goal: finding Ethan's daughter. They worked through the night reviewing security footage, interviewing witnesses, tracking down leads that went nowhere. And somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, when the fear became too much to bear alone, he let Ava hold his hand. By noon, they had Lily back in Ethan's arms. Ava stayed with him through all of it. She sat beside him in the police station and stood behind him in the social worker's office and held Lily's hand when the little girl finally started to cry. When it was over, when Lily was asleep in her own bed and the apartment was finally quiet, Ava sat with Ethan on his couch. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know how to. I can't even begin to." "You don't have to thank me," she interrupted. "I would do it again. I would do anything for that little girl, and for you, if you'd let me." "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Ava said. "But I think that's okay. I think maybe we can figure out together." In the months that followed, they did figure it out, slowly and imperfectly, and with plenty of mistakes along the way. They built something gradual, more real, a foundation of trust and understanding that grew stronger with every conversation, every shared meal, every evening spent watching Lily play with her purple dragon. The day Ava asked Ethan to bring Lily to her apartment for dinner was a milestone neither of them acknowledged out loud. After dinner, she led them to a room at the end of the hallway. Inside was a space that had been transformed into a child's paradise, a canopy bed covered in fairy lights, shelves filled with books and toys, a corner set up with art supplies. And on the wall in a simple frame was one of Lily's drawings, the one she had made of the three of them together, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "I had it done last week," Ava said quietly, "in case you ever wanted to stay over." Lily ran into the room with a shriek of delight. Ethan turned to Ava, and she was watching Lily with an expression he recognized because he felt it too. "I don't know what this is," he said, "what we're becoming, but I know I want to find out." Ava smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen.
So do I.
However long it takes, whatever it looks like, I want to be here, Ethan, with both of you, if you'll have me. He answered by taking her hand, and they stood there together, watching Lily dance around her new room. And for the first time in a very long while, Ethan Cole believed that the future might actually be something worth looking forward to.